I want to introduce myself first. I am Warren Scrim. I'm the Regional Sales Manager for TOA Canada for the Alberta, BC, Northern Territories areas. A lot of you might already be familiar with the M2, and if you are, then consider this to be a bit of a review. If not, then welcome, and I hope to educate you a little bit today. So just a quick overview. When we say things like additional features and new features, these are in comparison to the old 9000, which was discontinued a while back. The 9000 M2 is kind of the centralized unit that we use in a lot of our multi-zone paging applications and things like that. So bear in mind those comparisons are to an older unit that hasn't been around for a while. So you're not likely to see too much from the old 9000 these days. So we're talking about the general features of the general product overview of some modules and tools. Particularly, we're looking at software overviews and connections as to how things kind of go together with the 9000 M2 series. Some of the features of the M2, we had some paging function increases over the original version. So now with the 9000 M2, you have the option of doing manual settings for telephone page functions, auto connections, and group settings, and a little bit longer connection time than you originally had in the old 9000 series. We have an improved GUI or graphic user interface for PC programming, makes it a more streamlined approach than the old version. And we do now have multiple windows on one screen, so you're not switching back and forth between the various windows in the DSP. Faster front panel programming. When you do use the front panel, it's faster than it would have built in with fewer button presses to obtain the features. And you have a display off feature on the video panel. After 20 minutes, it will come out, so it doesn't put that extra wear and tear on the video panel on the front. It is compatible with all the modules that we have had in the 900 series, in the previous 9000 series, and of course the keypads, etc., that we designed for the M2. For the general look at the product lineup for the 9000 series, there is of course the M9000 M2 in of itself, which is at the bottom of that is indicated there. That is the matrix mixer version. Does not have any amplifiers built into it, so if you're using a system that requires quite a high zone count or a high power capacity, then you'll want to be using just the straight up matrix version that does have only line outputs on board. It's got line outputs, otherwise everything else is done on modules. The other models of this, the A9060 SM2, that's a single output 60 watt unit, so you've got one output built into that, giving you up to 60 watts there. The A9120, single output up to 120 watts on that one. The 9240 SHM2 is up to 240 watts, single output. Then you have the two-channel versions, the 9060 and the 9120. These each give you two channels built into the initial chassis, in the main chassis of the 9000, so that you don't need to have external amplifiers for those two channels, 60 or 120 watt versions respectively. And then along the bottom, you see the 9000 series wall panels that we have for it to do remote controls for presets and volume controls and things of that nature, and of course the RC-001T module, which is required to introduce the remotes to the 9000 series amplifier. So quick feature breakdown of the 9000 M2, 32 scenes programmable plus up to 32 paging events. The operating mode, there's one main operating mode. It operates as a mixer and the matrix unit, so those two systems are built in, and you're able to program matrix and mixing in, as opposed to having to switch between. In the old days, that's the way they would have had to do things. The maximum number of remote controllers that is available in the M2 goes up to 20, including the use of the mainframe itself, the C-001T module, and RC-001T, so you can get up to 20 remote stations with that. Displaying the speaker EQ presets, it's very handy to have those presets show up on the screen when you do program them in, so that does have that option available to it. ZP-001T modules are coming in to deal with the zone paging for telephones, and you have three settings on those, whether they be manual set, an auto setting, or the group functions, and we'll get into those in a little bit. For programming, we have a multi-view graphic user interface that you can export your files to a CSV file to export as needed, so you can program in advance and then import your file at a later time when you're actually physically in front of the unit. So that gives you that ability to do the programming in advance and have everything ready to go when it comes time to do the installation. 7 usable remotes for the M9002, and we'll get into those shortly. And button functions on those remotes are able to change presets, give you volume up and down control, channel on or off, channel mutes, emergency mutes, paging activations, power, relay activates, and cross-point assignments, whether they be exclusive or simultaneous. We'll touch on that as well, and we'll move on from here. So that's a general look at the features of the M9000 M2 series, and we'll have a look further on here. So for looking at the remotes that are available for the M9000 M2, of course, these do require use of the RC-001 Keypad module. This is the module that installs in the back of the M9000 M2, and these do require external power supplies. So if you're using up to 8 remote stations, then you can use only one power supply, but if you're going up to 16, then you will need to power both sides of the unit with an individual 80-246 power supply on each side. Showing here are the ZM9011 remote module or plate. That is the 4 preset button station, so you can change the presets as they have been programmed from the 9000. Of course, you can totally adjust these as needed for your application. The ZM9012 is a typical volume control, so you can program that to be an input control or an output control for any single input or output channel. Then the 9013 gives you 8 presets to choose from, and the 9014 gives you preset switching and volume control. Now, of course, one does have to pay attention to the fact that volume control is programmed to either an in or an out, and it is connected to specifically that one, so it doesn't change with the presets that are pressed on the 4 buttons. So the volume control is fixed, while the 4 buttons do input changes and preset changes as required. Some of the functions that the keypads are able to do, the new multi-functions keypads allow setting of various different additional controls, such as, like I mentioned, scene changing or loading, changing your cross points, which is to change the way that the matrix is set up, and of course these are all pre-programmed. You can initiate paging from the wall stations. You can change your control outputs off of the main unit, and input or output volume control if it's so equipped from the unit itself. So if you do have that programmed in and you have enough stations in place to do all your different zones, then you can absolutely make it work however you need to. LED indication on the front indicates the volume levels and the button activation, so that you can see exactly what's going on with the system right there from the remote panel. Now, having a look at how we would set the remotes on the M9000 M2 in the software itself, we're having a look at the remote controller setting wizard here. So this here shows a ZM9014 control unit, and how you would program it in the software. So in this case, what you see is that this one has been programmed as an output unit, or the volume control side. So the volume control here has been programmed for outputting on the main outputs by the looks of things. So that's going to output channels 1 and 2, and that's going to adjust the outputs for those two channels specifically as it's programmed here. The function selections on the buttons themselves. So in this case, button 1 has been assigned to do a change of scene. Button 2 has assigned to change crosspoint. So if there's a different matrix setup that has been programmed into the system, that's what that button is there doing. Button 3 in this case is initiating pages. So when you do need to do a page override, that would be the button to hit there. And button 4 in this case is changing controlled outputs. And there are a couple of different options when it comes to changing control outputs. You have the level or immediate, I believe is the other one, and basically you have the option of it being a single button press to engage and remain engaged, or it can be a button press that is just a straight switch from straight on off to make those control outputs activate. That would be the dry contacts, of course, on the chassis of the M9002. Looking again at the cross points, what we've seen here is that you're switching between a matrix that sends input 1 to output 1 to a setting that allows input 2 to go straight to input 2. So that would be the programming that's involved on the crosspoint change. And the scene change on function button 1 is straight assigning to activate scene 1 in the system. Whatever that has been programmed to do, that's what it'll activate. An example of how you would wire the keypads. They all do run on Cat5. This is an example of doing a run for each of the modules, for each of the remote stations rather, which you can, of course, use quite a lot of wire to take care of that, because Cat5 doesn't really drop a lot of signal throughout the distance. So in a scenario like this, you can have a total of up to 2,624 feet stretched across the 8 different wires. That's not a very typical way to see things set up. They're usually set up on daisy chains, but it really does depend on your configuration, what you actually require in your facility to dictate how these are going to be wired. Having a look now at the more typical daisy chain version of wiring these, you can do up to 16 total remote control units on a single RC001T. That's as much as the 9000M2 can handle. And as I mentioned earlier, we do require a power supply for each bank of 8 of those control units. So what you see here is an example of how you would daisy chain the first 8 off the main outputs, and the second set of 8, which is 9 through 16, off the lower half of the RC-001T. And you do need to maintain that those daisy chains do stay within those groups of 8 so that we have no confusion. Otherwise, very simple to set up, and you can do a total of up to 656 feet from the unit to the endpoint through daisy chaining, that being the last control unit in the run. Now, to address these, the remotes all do need to have their own address in so that they know exactly what they're doing and how they interface with the 9000M2. And to do that is very, very simple. Once you pull them out of the box, you see on the top of the module that it has a very small dial on it. It's just a quick screwdriver turn to give it an address to one of the alphanumeric digits, A to F or 0 to 9. Those, of course, showing the routing from anywhere from 1 to 16. That will dictate to the 9000M2 exactly which remote control unit is sending it orders so that it can keep things straight internally. Having a quick look at the keypad terminal connection here, you'll see it's very basic. It doesn't take an RJ45 crystal. It actually does do straight terminations to the back of the unit. But as you see, very simple in terms of the connections themselves. You have plus, minus, power supply input there, of course. And basically, it works with each unit of daisy chain into, I believe the wiring goes into the top and out of the bottom daisy chain units. But when you do get into a scenario like that, just give us a quick buzz. Is the easiest thing to make sure that all the connections are going proper, and our tech support team will be more than happy to help to make sure that if you have any questions, by all means, that you get the answers that you need to make sure these are wired. If I could just get everyone to have a quick look at their computer screen, to mute your mics if you're not participating in the discussion, that would be great, just to make sure that we have not too much interference going through the rest of the presentation. Having a look at the ZP-001T paging module. This is a typical telephone system paging module. You can plug your typical DTMF phone system into this to handle phone paging for you. Now, in the very original 9000 series mixers, you only had the option of doing an all-call page directly into this with manual setups. But now we have the option of whether we will run that on an auto function, whether we can manually set the zoning on these, or whether we need to do group functions. So in which case we can have multiple zones set together as groups, pre-configured, so that it's only a single button press to send a page out to those particular zones. So the auto function on this is basically you press the paging function on your phone system, and it requires no dialing. Aside from that, it would do a direct all call to the zone that it's set up to do, and you would not have to press any other buttons for that function. In manual, you can have a little bit more control, so it will allow you to page specific zones based on the number combination that you press at the beginning of your page. And of course, as I mentioned, the group settings, basically what you do in there with the groups is you pre-program them in the 9000 M2 software, and they will allow automatic paging through various zones, however you configure the zones to be grouped together, so that you're not having to dial in each zone separately. It just pages directly to all of the zones that are included in that group. Contact closures can also be activated when a page is initialized, so that helps you to do things like lockdowns and things of that nature. If you do have a door system with contact inputs to handle that, it can do it. Adjustable connection time right from 30 seconds to 10 minutes, so you have full control over how long you need your pages to be, how long you can set the limitations to be on that, so that you're never cut off in the middle of a page just because of the way that the timing is set in terms of connection time for paging. Paging level also now has its own volume control, so you do have control over the volume with which your paging will come through. And of course, various priority settings. There's 3 priority settings plus your background music, so in total 4 priorities that can dictate which pages are coming through when and what has to be muted in order for those pages to come through. The software is a very functional graphic user interface that can only be used on the M2 series. So if you do happen to still have an old 9000 somewhere, well, lucky you. First of all, you're seeing a very good reflection of TOA quality and the fact that our stuff keeps on kicking. But if you do happen to have an old 9000, bear in mind the M2 software will not work with the original 9000. Multiple menus are available all on one screen, so you've got it all kind of in one place. You don't have to go searching through various different menus for the various functions that the 9000 M2 can provide to you. There's a separate menu for the keypads, again, so they don't get in and confuse the issue when you're not actually looking to program keypads. Speaker EQ now shows on the graph, which is very, very handy. Because we all want to visually be able to see exactly how our speakers are going to respond to the signals that are input to the system. Initial setup also now allows you to pull the last file used from the M9000, M2, so you're not starting right from scratch every time. If there is already a setting that's been imported to the unit, you can pull that back out and start from where where you finished last time or where the last person left off when it came to programming the system. So it'll be a quick way to find out exactly how things are already programmed when you come into a site. And then there is the serial porting wizard on there, or serial port setting wizard on there as well, which of course is going to dictate how this will interface with your computer in order to make the software do the things you need it to do. So that's pretty important that serial setting happen. As you can see, this is the setup wizard. This is the initial screen you would see when you fire up the M9000 M2 software. If you're starting a brand new system from scratch, of course, that would be the new file, which you would then make your adjustments, and then you could save and download to a 9000. The serial settings port wizard, of course, is where you would start to actually interface with your computer, and generally a fairly straightforward setup with that. It's going to depend on what your computer is that would dictate how that program will actually happen. The download to 9000, the download 9000 to PC, that is where you would go to pull the last file that was saved to the 9000 up onto your screen so that you can make adjustments to an existing program that's already been put into the system. Of course, there is the browse function, which allows you to look through your computer to find something that you may have programmed in advance that you want to load into a 9000, and that is to load the existing file on the PC. Moving past the initial setup wizard here, it's pretty straightforward. We are in the initial setup wizard that dictates what we have for modules going into the system. So there are various different modules that work with the 9000 system, and these are all going to be input modules, output modules, zone paging modules, remote control modules, contact closure control modules, and any of the older 900 series modules for the basic 900 series mixer amplifiers will work in the 9000s as well. Just bearing in mind those are not digital, so they don't have as much programming that you can do with them. But in the case that you see in front of you, we have two line input modules listed there. So that's 4 inputs in slot 1 and 2 altogether. We have the acoustic noise canceling module on slot 3, the AN-001, which can interface with our noise cancellation microphone to detect the ambient noise in the room, to adjust volume levels accordingly so that we don't lose our signal amongst the noise that's happening in the facility. Then we have the ZP-001, that's your telephone paging, zone paging module. And then the T-001s are line level output modules, so the two modules there give you a total of 4 outputs plus the 2 that would come native on the 9000 series. So in this case, we have a total of 6 outputs living in this 9000. Lower on the list there, we see the RC-001T, that's controlling any remote control plates, and the C-001T, or C-001 there is the contact control module as well. So we have kind of a fully populated 9000 here, and we are able to, on the right-hand side, label what the inputs are that are going into each of those modules so that we can kind of keep them straight in our heads as to how these are going to work. Of course, there is the stereo link button there as well, so if you are working with a stereo type output system, you can make that link outputs to act as stereo output there. So that's kind of the quick look at how you would configure the system based on what modules you're using. Now bear in mind, with the modules, your input modules are intended to go into slots 1 through 4, and your output modules are 5 through 8. So you have a total of 8 inputs and 8 outputs that you can work with on this, and bearing in mind, of course, 2 outputs are already built into the chassis of the 9000, so you don't have to worry about populating all 8 outputs through the cards. All right, so having a look at the graphic user interface, as you can see, multiple windows showing here. On the left, you see how we do scene saving. So this is activating various different scenes that you have programmed through the areas on the right. So you need to make sure that when you program something as a scene and you want to make sure that that stays as a scene, you have to record it as such. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult to bring that back up again. That's typically the one spot where people run into issues is forgetting to save and to upload when they need to with this DSP. So that's where all your scenes are saved, and allow you quick access to make adjustments to those scenes as necessary. On the right, what you see at the right-hand top side is the overall view of the internal structure of the DSP that exists in the 9000. So you're seeing the first 4 channels as mic inputs here. Channel 5 is an MP3 player, channel 6 being a CD player, and channel 7 got your phone input through a ZP module, and that's taking up 2 inputs as well. So lower on the screen, you'll see on the bottom left, this is an example of the input level. So in this case, what has happened is someone has clicked the input on one of the inputs, the volume side of things, and this is allowing you to see the volumes for channels 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's actually allowing all 8, but we have only the first 4 populated, so that you can actually see based on the slider where your levels are set. You have the adjustment, the ability to adjust the sensitivity, the bass, and the treble on each of these inputs from here as well. And as to whether or not you want or need phantom power going to a mic output, that is engaged from here as well. Now, with any of the areas on the top right, you can click and it'll bring up the window for that section down below. So in this case, what's happened is we clicked on the crosspoint section in the middle of the upper area, and that brings us our matrix view. So this is where you can program the system to send certain outputs to certain inputs to certain outputs. So in this case, channel 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all sending to all of the first 6 output channels, but not sending to channel 7 and 8. So we do have, if we look back at the way the modules were set up, we know that there are no channel 7 and 8 outputs, so that makes perfect sense. So this is sending 1, 2, 3, and 4 all through all of the existing outputs on that system. This can be adjusted as needed, so you can send, theoretically, if you're looking at a very basic setup, you can send channel 1 just out of output 1, or you can send it out of all 4 or all 6. Any way you like, you can program this to send any input to any output and adjust as needed. Now to have a look at the acoustic noise cancellation or control rather level adjustments. So this is in the AN-001 module. That's the modular activating here, and this allows you to have control over what your acoustic noise, or rather the ambient noise levels are doing and how they affect your system and how it will respond. So in this case, it's taking an adjustment when the level is at minus 10 dB. It's compressing a range of 0 to minus 6 dB. Sample time of 20 seconds, so that's how long it will take between samples. And you've got your output channel that is controlling, and your monitor outputs on or off, so whether you're monitoring this or not, there's an adjustment for that. The reference levels would be the detection of what the level is in the space, so that would indicate to you where you're sitting, and the adjustment is how much it actually needs to adjust per the levels. More information, of course, is available through our tech support department, no matter what the case be. So any questions, of course, on how to program these in a more specific fashion for your facility specifically, you can absolutely get in contact with our tech support guys, and they will be more than happy to help with these setups. For zone paging setups, here's a look at how you would adjust between the manual, auto, and group functions that we were discussing earlier. So as I mentioned, the manual really indicates you can tell it which zones it's paging into by dialing those particular zones in through your phone system. Auto gives you the ability to just hit a single button off of your phone system and page all that are programmed for that output. And group function, of course, is to allow you to group multiple zones together to page them all at a single button press, rather than having to manually separate each of those zones. The mode just indicates where that page is coming from, going to, and connection time is the limitation that you can put on how long that connection can be open for. As I mentioned, up anywhere from 30 seconds to 10 minutes is the limitations you can place on that. And you can have the option of adding a pre-announced tone or leaving it without pre-announced. So that's a quick click to indicate whether you need a pre-announced tone or not in your system. The ZP volume output setup, so this is going to dictate how loud each of those paging zones will be when it dictates the volume levels of the pages. So they are set. First of all, you've got your priority overrides already set, so this will let you have some control over the volumes in each of the zones when you do a page. For instance, you may be paging zone 1 into a quiet area, so it doesn't need to be quite as loud, whereas zone 2 might be going into a louder area, so it needs to be quite a bit louder in order to be heard over the ambient noise. So that's kind of the quick look at the volume control setup for the ZP module. Priority settings, this is in the paging section as well. So as mentioned, you have a total of 4 priorities here, the 4th being the background music or main level. Other than that, the other 3 priorities are for overriding each other. So you'll have, in this case, channel 1 is set up with a priority of 2, channel 2 set up with a priority of 3. So in this case, if 2 pages were made at the same time, they would both override the background music, but 2 would override 3. So the one you would actually hear would be the priority level 2, which is coming in from channel 1 in this case. Channel 7 has the override for has the number 1 priority for the whole system, so everything gets muted by anything coming in on channel 1 in a case like this. You can set priorities to be the same on a channel-by-channel basis, but you will want to be a little careful with that, because then if you have multiple pages coming in at the same time, they will be at the same priority level and will mix together. This is separate from the scene setup, so it's a slightly separate window that you don't have to look at all of the time, which is kind of nice. It's not going to be there to confuse the issue for you if you're actually not requiring to work with the priorities, etc. Your ducking level is anywhere from 0 dB to off, so it can either do an override and come in without doing any muting whatsoever, which we have here, or it can completely shut off the signal from the other input that's coming in, so that you can override it completely. And as you see on channel 7, which is set as priority 1, in this case it's doing a 20 dB duck on the output channels, so it won't lose the background music entirely, but it will shut it down by 20 dB, so you can allow the page to come in over top of whatever's coming in on the rest of the mixer. This page just really is showing the mic and phone group or zone paging outputs. So this is allowing you to matrix your zones as required to make these pages happen the way that you need to make them happen. As you can see here, we have inputs, input 1 routing to output 1 and 2, input 2 routing to 3 and 4, input 3 routing to 5 and 6, input 4 routing to all 6 output zones, input 5 rather in this case, routing to 1 and 2 outputs, 6 goes to 3 and 4 again, input 7 going to outputs 5 and 6, etc., etc., and number 8, of course, going to all 6 outputs in this paging group. So you see your priority levels are set there as well, and that's where you can adjust which pages go to which outputs. Again, if you need any instruction on specifically how to make this work in your own specific setup, by all means, our tech support guides are there to help. And these can be synchronized as well, as you can see on the right-hand side. The remote control wizard itself, to set up the actual remote, first of all, you would assign the addressing to the module that's earlier in the DSP. But when we drill down to what those buttons are actually going to do, we're looking here at a ZM9011 remote control unit. In this case, all 4 buttons have been set to initiate paging. So these are set for initiating different pages from different inputs to different outputs. So this is really is what that's meant to do. So single button push to activate the paging for the preset matrixing that you've put into the system. Remote control wizard for the volume control side of things. So in this case, being a ZM-9012, which is a single volume control unit. Now this one can be assigned either as an input or as an output. In this case, it's set as an output. And then we see which channels it's assigned to. So this is assigned to output channels 1, 2, 5, and 6, and is leaving output channels 3 and 4 alone. So either there's another volume control controlling those, or those are set up without an external volume control so that they're being controlled directly from the amplifier. In either case, though, channels 3 and 4 are not being controlled by this volume control unit in this case. As we see here, ZM9013 is basically the same as the 4-button station, but this gives you 8 buttons to work with, so it gives you more options in the single 2-gain unit for making control changes. So in this case, we have scene changes on the first 4 buttons and control changes on the last 4 buttons. And we get to see exactly what they are activating on the right-hand side. So in terms of the assigned values, button 1 is going to change everything to scene 1. So whatever's programmed into scene 1 will get activated off of button 1 in this case. Same thing for button 2 is activating whatever scene 2 is that's been programmed into the system, and likewise for scene 3 and 4. These are just direct scene changes on the remote module. Then we have the control outputs. We either have level consistent outputs or the toggle, which is your immediate press. So that's the different ways to handle the control outputs from the 9000 unit and to activate them from button station. Having a look at the programming for the ZM9014, we have here, it's 4 buttons and a volume control. So it basically puts together the ZM9011 and the 9012 into a single 2-gain unit, but basically does the same job as both of those do. So this allows you to, in this case, you've got crosspoint selections input on 1, 2, 3, and 4. So each of those is just changing the matrixing that is inherent in this system. with whatever the way you program those cross points to be. So whether you're changing a different input to a different set of outputs, etc., that's what those are going to be able to do for you. Now, on the volume control side of things, as mentioned, the volume control is fixed. So once you have programmed that, you're really only adjusting one output or one input. So in the case that you see here, this one is assigning input 1, or this is going to be a volume control rather for input 3 going to all of the outputs. As you can see there, it has input 1 going, or input 3 going to output 1, input 3 going to output 2, etc. That is indicating that it's control for the input side on input 3 only. The crosspoint keypad setup, so this is kind of how it looks when you are programming keys for your crosspoints. Looks very similar to the main crosspoint programming section, where you get to dictate to the system how the button is going to affect the matrixing of the unit. So in this case, the button press is going to send channel 3 through outputs 1 and 2, channel 4 through outputs 3 and 4, and channel 3 again also through 5 and 6. So channel 3 routing to 1, 2, 5, and 6, channel 4 routing to output channels 3 and 4 only. Having a look at some phone paging examples. In this case, we are looking at an auto phone paging setup, which automatically connects to the desired outputs. In this case, we have been pre-programmed for that single button push from the PBX to activate a page in only the sales area of this space. So the back room area in this space is not being paged into from the phone system. Only the sales area in this case is getting the page. We could, of course, program that to be an all page as well, or, like I said, to whichever specific zone is being paged or is programmed in for that automatic page. Some examples, and more examples of how you might do group paging with the ZM module on the 9000 M2. In this case, we have the phone dialing 0, 1, and hashtag to activate the group 1 output. So this is, or rather the zone output for zone 1. This can also then, you would use a different dial sequence to access zone 2 or zone 3 or zone 4, or you would build those into various groups and assign a number to them to activate the groups. Multiple rooms and controls. In a case like this, what we have here is the ability to do multiple rooms, and it makes it very, very simple to handle a facility, all of its inputs and outputs, all from one head-end unit. As I said, you can do anywhere from up to 8 inputs and 8 outputs, and matrix them however you need. So in this case, we have a zone for the patio, a zone for the dining area, a zone for the kitchen, and a zone for the waiting area. The patio being fed, patio and dining area in this case being fed by the amplifier outputs on the 9000 series. If there was another amp in play, those would just be line levels, and this would be an M9000 M2, but in this case, this is an A-9000 series, so it has the amps built in on those 2 channels. And we have the output cards, the T-001 keys going into the external amplifier to run the other couple of zones. So we've got that kind of taken care of through those outputs there. Now we have volume control and preset stations in each of these. So this is all ZM9014 control stations in the lower portion of this, with the 1 8-button station activating presets. And we do have a master control at the bottom that is handling some preset control and volume control for the master of the system. That would be likely close to the head end that you would have that set up, whereas each of the other remote panels would be set up in their specific rooms. So in this case, perhaps you might have input selection and out for, say, the patio, you might have 4 inputs that you're selecting from, and an overall output control for the volume control output specifically for the patio. So that might be how you might have that running. Same thing in the kitchen and the waiting areas. So these would adjust those volume levels at the mixer level, at the matrix level, and send those out through the external amplifier so that it's handling the control from the mixer side. The amplifier would not then have to be touched in terms of changing the output gains on it. It's all being handled from the mixer itself. Otherwise on here we do have a number of inputs, all going through the appropriate input modules, and we do also have 2 mics in the input 1 and 2 slot. Those are most likely going to be doing override paging or all call type application. It depends on what the overall application of the system is meant to accomplish, whether this is going into a restaurant for background music and announcements and things of that nature, or whether it's an office scenario with various background music inputs that you can listen to, but with paging requirements being the main driver. So it really depends on what your application actually is as to how you would really truly set this up. But that's a good look at how you might set up a multiple room application. It does room combining as well, so if you have 2 rooms, say they are in a hotel conference scenario and you've got 2 rooms right beside each other, you can separate or divide these rooms through an M9000 M2. Again, we have the ZM9014 doing master control on this. We also have a ZM9014 in each of the spaces, handling preset and volume controls for those spaces, and this can all be programmed very simply through the 9000 series software, and can allow you to have those adjustments, and whether you're using 1 room, 2 rooms separately, or bulking them both together and using the same inputs to output to both spaces, you can easily program it to do those things as well. So very useful in those types of applications. One thing I did want to step back and have a quick mention of when it comes to phone paging. The module was not indicated so far in this webinar, but it is one that I did want to mention. The SP-11N module does allow SIP paging, so if you do have a SIP phone system and not a DTMF older style phone system, you do have up to 5 zones of SIP paging that you can do through the SP-11N, which is one of the newer modules that we released for the 9000 M2. So just bear that in mind, that if you can program through either a standard DTMF line or through a SIP phone line to have your paging done.